Now we'll hear from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Mark Agnew, for up to 5 minutes, please, for opening remarks.
Well, Chair and honourable members, it's a pleasure to be here today, and the honourable members would have seen the submission that the Chamber made via the clerk, so I'm going to focus my remarks mostly on the competition policy provisions of the Budget Implementation Act as well as the luxury goods tax. So allow me to start first on competition policy. Given the evolving nature of the economy, our competition policies certainly need to keep pace. However, getting it right is critical. This means robust consultation with stakeholders, including the business community, but also others from legal, civil society, and consumer groups as well. The Chamber is particularly concerned with three elements and is urging this committee and the government to remove them from Bill C-19 and place them into the mandate of the full Competition Act review that the Minister of Industry has committed to undertaking later this year. First is the abuse of dominance provisions and codifying a number of definitions. An overly broad approach to defining what is anti-competitive is particularly problematic because every act of competition may, at least in the eyes of the competitor, impede their progress or expansion. Indeed, an action seeking to outdo our competitor is at the very heart of healthy and necessary competition. Clarity is also needed on areas like privacy, given we have a separate federal privacy regulator in this country. While some have argued that these proposals codify existing practice, we should not be haphazard about amending legislation given it cannot be then changed back on a whim later on. Second are the changes made to the administrative monetary penalties. The proposed changes to the AMPs represent a significant overcorrection. Such significant penalties of up to 3% of worldwide revenues are problematic when the provisions are being expanded and companies are left without the benefit of existing jurisprudence to understand what they mean in practical terms. The penalties additionally scope in activities that are not linked also to violations occurring in Canada with the activities by virtue of taking a worldwide revenue approach instead of a Canadian revenue approach. Third and finally are the provisions relating to no poach. Have others have pointed out in separate forums, this poses challenge in the franchise context where companies have provisions often written to contracts as a means to ensure that investments in training in their employees are not being undermined. And there are also interactions with provincial labour laws as well that need to be considered. I don't have specific amendments to offer today, which reflects the time needed for the Chamber to consult our members that sit across different sectors. A few hours of meetings at committees on legislation unfortunately does not suffice for the consultations that we hope the government will instead make in part of the Phase 2 review rather than putting these three provisions into the Budget Implementation Act. Despite the assertions made by some that we should make the changes now and figure it out later through administrative guidance or reopening it in the Phase 2 review, I think that would be a mistake. We don't know what will happen from that review given it has not yet actually begun. Additionally, there may be a tendency to view these Competition Act changes in the context of the current inflationary environment. Unfortunately, these changes will not address current inflationary pressures, so we should not take a knee-jerk reaction with that goal in mind. I want to briefly end off by talking about the luxury goods tax. Members will be aware from other witnesses that have appeared about what the luxury goods tax means for Canadian aircraft manufacturers. The industry is still in recovery mode, as others have said, from the pandemic, and concerns persist from our standpoint as well as to what this tax means for industry. There are a number of specific areas where we hope to see amendments made to the bill, should the government continue to go ahead with the proposal. This includes exemptions for exports, and also the treatment of liabilities when it comes to usage by the buyer after a sale has occurred. We also need to understand how the tax will impact our competitiveness relative to other jurisdictions. The U.S. experience, of course, was to introduce such a tax only to then repeal it a short time thereafter. Thank you for taking the time to consider the Chamber's perspectives, and we'd be happy to answer your questions.